Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to our discussion of genetics. We're going to be starting to talk about genetics, and in order to have a good foundation in this unit, we want to make sure that we have a good understanding of some basic terminology. In order to get to that terminology, I thought it would make sense for us to, let me get rid of this, start talking about a particular genetic disease. The disease that we're going to talk about is cystic fibrosis. And cystic fibrosis is a recessive hereditary disease. And this particular disease, it primarily affects the organs of the respiratory system, so the trachea, the bronchi, and the bronchioles in the lungs. It also has an effect on cells of like the digestive system, primarily cells inside of the pancreas and the bile ducts that empty their materials into the large intestine during digestion. Sorry about that. The CFTR gene, scientists have determined that it's located on chromosome number 7. So it's not on chromosome number 1. It's not on chromosome number 16. It is on like the leg portion of chromosome number 7, right there, highlighted in red. So all of us have versions of this particular gene on our chromosome number 7s. We have a version that we inherited from our mother. It was present in the egg. We also have a version of that gene that we inherited from our father. It was present in the sperm. And the two different versions of the genes are responsible for giving us a certain version of the trait, some kind of physical appearance, so to speak, for this disease or not having this disease. Okay, let's get back to the disease. So characteristics of the disease are people tend to have a persistent cough that generates thick mucus. They have wheezing, breathlessness. They have a hard time exercising. They typically don't gain weight very well, and they have problems with their digestive system that can lead to intestinal blockage and lots of other kinds of problems too. The reason being is that this recipe in the DNA codes for the formation of a certain kind of channel protein. Now, second semester, I totally love biology. Not that I didn't love it first semester, but I really love it second semester because so many things that we talk about first semester come into play in the second semester. Biology really is about relationships between different kinds of concepts, and those relationships really come to fruition and come to recognition in the second semester. Anyway, so channel proteins is something we talked about way back in Unit 2. Channel proteins act as doorways to allow certain molecules or particles to move across the cell membrane because there's something about the particle that prevents it from moving across the membrane on its own. Chloride ions are atoms that have charges to them, and we learned that any kind of a particle that has a charge can't get across the membrane on its own, so it needs a special doorway. Awesome. CFTR channel proteins are that door for chloride ions. Unfortunately, we have found that there are certain versions of this CFTR gene that exist in nature that result in a malfunctioning or non-functioning CFTR channel protein. As a result, the chloride ions can't get across the cell membrane. You're like, so what? Big deal. Well, this creates a hypertonic situation where water that is in greater concentration and greater amount outside of the cell tends to move in toward the cell. And that water is a part of mucus that causes mucus to get thicker and thicker because water is leaving it. And that mucus then prevents materials from getting across the cell membrane as it should. So that's a little bit about cystic fibrosis. Anyway, we have found that there's a functioning version of the gene and there's a non-functioning version of the gene. Now, we're going to use this foundation of cystic fibrosis to help us to better understand 8 different vocabulary terms. The first 2 terms that we're talking about are gene and allele. For all 8 terms, I have them paired up because I think that most of these terms have a complementary term in this unit, and I think that gene and allele go together very well. We've talked about genes and alleles already in our course. Genes are simply segments of DNA that code for a specific protein. They have a specific location on chromosomes. Again, in the case of CFTR, it's located on the leg or the long portion of the chromosome number 7. And we've identified at least 2 different alleles for this particular gene. We've identified a recipe that codes for a functioning CFTR channel protein. And instead of writing out the whole ATCG recipe, instead we simplify our lives a little bit and we just use a capital letter F to represent the functioning CFTR channel protein recipe. We use a little f to represent the non-functioning CFTR channel protein recipe. Again, recipes are those codes that we find in DNA. The next two terms are genotype and phenotype, and again, I think that they go together. Genotype refers to the actual genetic makeup that the organism has. It's the DNA codes that organism inherited from its biological parent or biological parents. Now, we totally understand how gene expression works. We understand that there's recipes in DNA, and for those recipes that we've got, proteins get made. And it's the protein that has an effect on your body, right? Well, that effect on the body, we call the phenotype, the physical appearance of the organism due to the proteins that they make, or maybe they have a different appearance because they're not making certain versions of the protein. There are three possible genotypes that exist in humans in regard to cystic fibrosis. There's what we call the big F genotype. There's the big F genotype. And there's a little f genotype. Now, you may be wondering, why are there two letters for these different genotypes? Well, let me take you back to meiosis. If you remember, in the process of meiosis, we have the separating of DNA and chromosomes in order to form haploid gametes. And then haploid gametes come together at fertilization to give us a diploid zygote. A diploid organism is an organism that has pairs of alleles or pairs of chromosomes. So an individual who has the big F genotype, they inherited a big F recipe, a recipe for a functioning cystic fibrosis CFTR protein from maybe their father in the sperm. They also inherited a functioning version of that gene from their mother in the egg. Someone who is big F inherited one functioning version of the gene from one parent and a non-functioning version of the gene from the other parent. In terms of phenotypes, the phenotypes that exist in humans are either individuals have functioning channel proteins and are healthy in regard to this particular disease, or individuals have non-functioning CFTR channel proteins and they have cystic fibrosis. All right, the next two terms, homozygous and heterozygous. Now, I'm sure that you're familiar with the prefixes homo and hetero. We see these prefixes in words like homosexual and heterosexual in the English language. Well, the prefix homo means same, and the prefix hetero means different. Just instead of sexual being at the end of the word, it's zygous, and zygous references the alleles. If someone is homozygous, it means that their alleles are the same. If someone is heterozygous, it means that their alleles are different. All right, it's time for you to do some practice. I've got two questions at the bottom of the screen. Will you please answer them now? What are the two homozygous genotypes? And what is the only heterozygous genotype in regard to cystic fibrosis? Let's use cystic fibrosis as our example throughout this tutorial. You can pause the video and then restart when you're ready to go. All right, the last two terms are dominant and recessive. Again, we've used these terms in class already, but we'll talk about them again. A dominant allele is the allele that gets expressed. A protein gets made when the organism is in the heterozygous situation. The recessive term refers to an allele that will only be expressed if two of them are present. So how does it relate to CFTR and cystic fibrosis? Scientists have determined that functioning CFTR is the dominant allele because that is the phenotype of someone who has the heterozygous genotype. Individuals who are big F, little f have functioning CFTR channel proteins. They do not have cystic fibrosis. Scientists have also determined that non-functioning CFTR is the recessive allele because the heterozygous individuals end up having the functioning CFTR genotype. All right, here we are. We're on our final question. So use the information that was provided in this tutorial to answer this question. What is the genotype of someone with cystic fibrosis? So that's the third question that I'm asking you today. Make sure to share all three answers with me when you come to class tomorrow. Also list out any questions that you have so that you can get answers to your questions. Thank you. Have a good night.